Hi, I'm Tim Crawford, and I'm going to talk about alignment. You've heard a lot already around areas that are important to all of us, and so alignment is really entailing how to bring it all together. So, common themes that you've already seen. What we were really tasked to do is look at what are the opportunities that are out there today that we can seek out, that we'd like to have available to us, and then what are some of the challenges that are facing us and preventing us from seizing those opportunities. So that's where we started. As we started to dig into this, what we've really found is that alignment has a couple of aspects to it. One is it becomes the business development arm for Data Center Pulse, or as the organization as we look at it moving forward. Alignment also becomes a liaison between different audiences, different disparate groups. And we'll talk a little bit about those groups and the relationships between them. Mark and others have already talked about the certifications and some of the benefits that that would bring to our industry. But we also have this other challenge of where are the next generation of data center operators going to come from? And we need to be thinking about that because we're not going to be there forever. So alignment also becomes a stimulation factor. So we start the process and then we can spin off different groups that are able to pick up those themes, carry them forward, and then bring it back to the collective to be shared amongst a larger contingent of customers. When you look at the audiences that this serves, it's pretty widespread. It's not just one aspect. It's represented by the customers. And that's really who we are. We're customers, right? But as you start looking at the model and its relationships really tie in the customers to the left, academic organizations to the north, out to the far other side would be government, and then bringing back around to vendors. And then you have these industry groups that'll sit in the middle and help govern those relationships and bring the different components together. So as you start drilling down a little further into what can we do, you really start developing two categories. One is kind of your short-term tactical items. These are things that any of us in the room can go out today and start working on. So if you're taking notes, this is where you want to start. Make sure that you're looking at metrics. You know, Mark had talked quite a bit about metrics, and we'll get into the details of that. Rebates and operational efficiencies. Those are the top three things that we came up with as areas to start today. Strategically, looking a little further out and requiring a little more effort would be things like education, power and cooling, facilities, et cetera, and I won't read through the list. So jumping into metrics, I don't want to rehash this necessarily, but PUE is obviously something that we're all familiar with, but we all look at PUE very differently in how we measure it. We need a common language to be able to work from. And this would be a great opportunity of where to start, partly because it's already somewhat understood, so we're dealing with a base foundation, but the other thing is it becomes a prerequisite for other things that I'll get into. We also need to agree on how we use these metrics. So being able to measure within our own organization as well as across organizations so that we can look at how we are evolving over time. And the way we do that is not just by defining it, but then working with each other. The second item that we had started to touch on has to do with rebates. I mean, rebates are something that a lot of people are familiar with. They know they exist, but they don't necessarily know how to get them, or from what they've heard or what they've seen, they're very difficult to get their hands on. What we're suggesting is a way, we need to develop a way to get our hands on these programs. We need a simpler way to get to rebates. We need a streamlined process to leverage to get to rebates. And this is only going to come through further conversation with the folks that not just have the rebates available, like the power companies, but also the other groups that are instigating or starting the conversations around incentives for organizations to work more efficiently. The last of the tactical items is operations, and I just want to draw your attention to the middle bullet there. Why is this an issue today? It's overwhelming. I'm sure if I asked any of you in the audience, what are your top 10 items around operations, you could probably come up with 10 or 20 different items that you wished you were doing more efficiently. But why aren't you today? Because that list is really long. We need a way to quickly not just boil it down, but leverage each other's experience. I might have experience in one area, you have experience in another area, you have experience in yet another area. How do we leverage that knowledge in such a way that we all collectively are able to improve our operational state? That's really what this is talking to. As this starts to develop, we'll start to see more standardization around those metrics and around the way that we do operate data centers. And that talks more into Mark's last presentation around certifications. So I alluded to the strategic items that'll take a little more time. We did jump into each of these a bit, but I think there needs to be a larger group involved when we start talking about each of these aspects. There's a lot of value in every single one of these. The challenge is that we really need to drill down a little further because we each have different expectations around the subjects, and it's not a clear outcome in terms of what's important to me versus you versus the next person. So we need to boil that down a bit. These will take a little more time, but they need to be done in parallel with the short-term tactical items. So where do we go from here? What the industry needs, as we saw it, was really a global consortium that is an independent, neutral, nonprofit organization of customers that speak for the voice of the customer. So it's customer-driven. Second, needs to align with the different audiences. Even though it's customer-driven, we need to ensure that we're tying up effectively with the vendors, with the government agencies, with academic organizations, and with the other industry groups. So you need to be able to effectively tie to all of the different representatives in that model that I showed earlier. The other thing that this global consortium needs to do is increase the visibility of the opportunities. Rather than each of us working independently, find a way to bring us together so that we can raise the visibility of those opportunities and find smarter ways to deal with them rather than each independently trying to tackle that list of 20 or 100 items. And lastly, this consortium needs to be the focal point for all of the data center issues. So if a new organization comes up and says, I've got issues with data centers and I'd like to find a group I can reach out to, who is that focal point for those data center issues, or where to start the conversation? And this consortium would be a great place for that. So one might ask the question, so where does Data Center Pulse fit into this? And really what we're doing is we're just identifying the opportunities at this point. I think there's more discussion to be had here around how is this developed and where do we take it from here as customers. So next steps, number one, form the consortium. Number two, continue the alignment discussion. It's only been, 36 hours? We've covered a lot of ground in just a day and a half, and there's a lot more ground to be covered. Prioritize and engage in the tactical items. Again, those are the things that you can leave here today and start working on. And if you're not doing that, definitely seize those opportunities. Meet the folks in the room. Try and leverage your brain trust here. Lastly, expand those strategic items, and let's get those discussions going as well so we can start making progress on them. They're going to take a little more time, but the sooner we start, the sooner we'll be able to seize the opportunities. And that's all I have.